Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 50 Trips Around the Sun. I've gotten all the way up to number 5. It's at 10% of the way there. But it's been a while, so thanks if you're tuning back in, and if you're new, it's me, Jason, and I'm exploring my life, as it were, my 50 trips around the sun. I turned 50 years old this year in 2019. So every year that I've been born, every year since I've been born, 1969 onward, I'm taking a look at that year and talking a little bit about what was going on in my life. Not a lot so far because I was an infant for most of this so far. And then what's going on in music, movies, and world events, kind of the through life. We're using one thing I did during my summer vacation. It's August 17th today, and one thing I did was I took my computer. It used to be over there. See, right there on that table in that room, and I took my big computer and I moved it out here to kind of where I use it more. My laptop I bought in 2010, my MacBook, so it's nine years old now. And it's starting to, it's showing signs of age. And I bought this nice, gorgeous, big iMac, and so I want to use it more. And so I put it out here where I know I will use it more. So different background. So we'll see how that works out in future. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're gonna talk about in 1973. So I would have been 3 years old, obviously, at the beginning, and then I turned 4 years old in 1973. So, again, not a lot of recollections living in the same house. My younger brother hasn't been born yet. Obviously, maybe I'm going to preschool. I think we went to England around that time because I remember we went to England when I was a very small lad. I want to say 3 or 4. My parents were both born in England, and before my younger brother Paul was born. Because I've seen pictures of me and my sister, and I believe we went for Christmas. So maybe it was Christmas 72, Christmas 73, and I would have been very young, and but like in winter coats and stuff, and things we weren't used to where I was growing up in California, because we didn't really have snow, and so those probably were very fun trips for me, but I don't remember a lot about them, to be honest. It would have just been nice to have the whole family together. My dad would have obviously gone, my mother, and the 2 of us, the 4 of us that made the core family at that point. Long trip on an airplane, which I'm sure was exciting for me at that age, etc., etc. Okay, so jumping into a look at the year, and we're going to start with music. So, man, doing the research for this year, if I could just live on an island with 1 year of music only, I think I could survive and be very, very well satisfied by just having the music that came out in 1973 on my iPod on the desert island, or whatever you want to say. As I go down the list here of all the albums that came out this year, it is outstanding. Selection, diversity, etc. Of course, I would miss more modern music. I'm a child of the 80s. I love 80s music, which we'll explore as we go along. But man, just phenomenal. And I even get, as you can see there from the pictures, how I love my Beatles. Oh, and my calendar over here. I even get a Beatles treat, which we'll get to in a minute or two. All right, so some of the top albums that came out that year were Paul McCartney actually released 2 albums with Wings, his kind of new side group. The first one was called Red Rose Speedway in April of 1973, and that has the song My Love on it. I don't even own that album, but I love the song My Love. It's a nice sort of a mid-tempo ballad. But then the album that really anyone who has just one Paul McCartney solo record in your collection, this is the one you should have. And that's saying something because he's got some top-notch solo material. But that's the album Band on the Run. Came out in December of 1973 and really dominated the charts well into 1974. The titular track, Band on the Run, is now just a stone cold radio classic. So it's him and Wings, but really Paul McCartney recorded a lot of the album himself. Paul McCartney can play bass, he can play guitar, he can play piano, he can play drums. There isn't a lot that he can't do. And so I think he did a lot of the parts himself, and then when they toured the album, etc., then he brings in other musicians. And of course his wife is ever present, his wife at the time, Linda, on some of the backing tracks and whatnot. But Band on the Run just has some, it's just a phenomenal album. You know, you're going to see, so one of the reasons I kind of set up this space over here is I'll be showing you the picture-in-picture. And, yeah, just such a good album. One of my all-time favorites. I have like a special version of it, and that I got in a special box when its anniversary came up, say in '88 or 98 or some year, and it is just a great album. Another equally amazing album is Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Came out in October 1973, the Elton John album. This has I think it's his most successful studio album of all time. It has Candle in the Wind, which he doesn't perform live anymore because he changed it when Princess Diana died. And now he won't sing that song anymore because of her. But of course it has the title track, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, has Benny and the Jets. It came out as a double album, 2 vinyl records and a gatefold sleeve. I'll be putting that up on the for you to look at. And again, like Paul McCartney, that was Elton's second album of 1973. This is how prolific these guys were at the time. He had, in January of 1973, so just 10 months before, he put out one of his more popular albums. It went to number 1. It's called Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. And it had Crocodile Rock on it, which I don't like so much. It's one of my least favorite Elton hits. It's just very cloying. I just, you know, the na 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 na. You know, I mean, it's kind of fun and goofy, but I don't include it on compilations I make a lot of times of him. And Daniel was a huge hit. So those 2 big hits were on that album. So he had 2 huge albums, both went to number 1. And I'll go get it in a minute. I have an amazing, when I cut and I come back, I'll show you. I have an amazing Goodbye Yellow Brick Road anniversary package. Some other huge albums for me that year. Well, let's talk about some of the albums that did really well. There's so many. Let me see. I have the top 5 singles. I don't have what won Grammy. I'm trying to think. I think Stevie Wonder won the Grammy for Inner Visions. Yeah, album of the year for 1973. Stevie Wonder's Inner Visions. Stevie Wonder was just in a peak time from about 73 to 76, 77. He put out like 5 albums in a row that are just Talking Book, Inner Visions. It just mind-blowing stuff. And Superstition was on the radio a lot back then, which is I just love Superstition. I just think it's the most funky, amazing song. But I'm a huge Stevie Wonder fan. Okay, going back to albums I really love. The Who put out Quadrophenia, which is not as well known as Tommy or even Who's Next, which had come out earlier in the decade. But Quadrophenia is probably my favorite of those 3. 515 is a personal favorite. Drowned on Quadrophenia is a personal favorite. I'll play you a little bit of Drowned here. All right. I don't know how much music I'm going to be playing. I know I always get hit for copyright. I don't care about the copyright. I just want the video to be able to be seen. But, yeah, just Pete Townshend. Again, it's kind of a concept album. They made it into a film. Sting had an early part in the film, really before the Police had blown up. They made the movie, I want to say, in 78, 79, and the Police were just starting to get big. Anyway, and of course, the big hit that most people know from Quadrophenia is Love Reign Over Me. So if you've never seen it, I'll try to find a link to it and put it down in the description. When The Who got inducted into the, not into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I take that back, when they were given the Kennedy Center honor, I believe while Barack Obama was president, and they were given this special honor in Washington, D.C. They always have other people come out and sing some of your songs, and they had this woman come out who I'd never heard of. She's like a blues singer, and she does this amazing version of Love Reign Over Me. So I'll try to include that in the description to let you go have it, check it out. It's phenomenal. Probably my favorite Led Zeppelin album came out in 1973, and that's Houses of the Holy. Dire Maker, the title track, Over the Hills and Far Away. It's only like 8 songs, but every song on that album I love. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's hard because Led Zeppelin 4 with Black Dog and Rock and Roll and Stairway to Heaven, Going to California. I mean, those 4 tracks alone are amazeballs. But House of the Holy, just for some reason, just as an album, like putting it on with your headphones and listening to it from start to finish, it just, it is my favorite Led Zeppelin album. Yeah, I think as a whole, it comes together so well, and each song plays into the next one, and I love it. All right, talk about a milestone in rock and roll history. You can't really get any bigger than Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. So I wasn't a huge Pink Floyd fan for a long time, and then I met a girl I met her in high school. We started dating when I was in college, and she was a senior in high school, and she didn't care about music too much. She could play music, but for some reason she loved Pink Floyd, and she really got me into Floyd. I knew a few songs. I knew Another Brick in the Wall and stuff, but she was the one who really introduced me to them, and I probably hadn't heard Dark Side of the Moon until I was 18 or 19 when we started dating. But man, do you fall in love with that record the first time you hear it, especially if you listen to it all the way through, and especially, I know it's cliche to say, but if you put headphones on, it's so immersive, and it's just so ahead of its time, and the craftsmanship, the musicianship, Time, Money, Us and Them, Great Gig in the Sky. Dark Side of the Moon is just, I can't even say, if you like rock and roll, you have to, it's like, all of these albums are amazing, but you have to have Dark Side of the Moon in your collection. It is a must. It's like top 10 must of all time. All right. The American Graffiti soundtrack came out. And we'll talk more about American Graffiti when we get to the movie section. But that album, which I didn't own in 1973, of course, but when I did eventually get that album as I went through, and as a Star Wars fan, I'm like, oh, George Lucas made this movie called American Graffiti. Let me check that out. It introduced me to so much 50s music, and I love 50s music, and early 60s tracks, doo-wop groups and stuff. It's great. It's like 40 songs, because they're all really short, but it's the Wolfman Jack stuff. Hey, coming at you, I can't do the Wolfman Jack voice, but yeah, just great. I mean, Buddy Holly and the Platters, the Coasters, Yakety Yak, Don't Talk Back, all the songs on there. A big album for me in the car when I was with my parents as we traveled around was John Denver's Greatest Hits. So John Denver had slowly, in 70, 71, 72, and then he came out with the Greatest Hits record in 73. And it was just one of those ones, we had it on vinyl for when we were in the house, and my dad also bought it on 8-track, so we could play it in the car. He loved John Denver. It's got, Rocky Mountain High, Calypso, it's got Annie's Song, it's got, of course, Take Me Home Country Roads, it's Sunshine on My Shoulder. It's just every big hit that you know John Denver for. So it's just one of those albums, and it's just it just takes me back when I hear those songs. And now in karaoke, when I go to sing with Japanese people, you can put Take Me Home Country Roads on, and they all know it, because it was featured in a Ghibli cartoon. Miyazaki makes these movies in Japan that are kind of like Disney movies here, and one of them is called Whispers of the Heart, and the theme song is Take Me Home Country Road, sung in Japanese, so they all know it, and then they'll sing along and etc. So it's always a popular one when I do it at karaoke. Okay, so the album I talked about, how I get to kind of cheat and have the Beatles in 1973, because obviously they broke up in 1970, is they brought out the first official um, Beatles compilations in 1973. And they were really quite ingenious about it, the way they did it. They brought out a red album and a blue album. And so right away, some of you know these albums just from me saying that, if you're of that time. And the red album was 1962 to 1966. So Please Please Me with the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, Help, Rubber Soul, and all the early stuff, the kind of boy band era, the Mop Heads and everything, and when they were still touring. And then the blue album is 67 to 70. So it's I think Revolver, anything from Revolver, yeah, would still be on the red album. But then the blue album, you'd be getting Paperback Writer, you'd be getting Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, and then into Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be. So they were both double albums on vinyl, lots of music. Which was great because it wasn't just like their number one hits or anything. You would get other songs that really expanded my knowledge of the Beatles. Because they're fairly comprehensive albums. I want to say maybe 30 to 40 songs on each album. So like 60 to 75 songs when you put it all together. And that's a good chunk of Beatles. And we had them on 8-track. It came on 2 8-tracks. And we took those 4 8-tracks, the red and the blue, on a lot of family trips. And I would just always ask to play them. I think my sister and maybe my mom got a little sick of them. But I just love those albums to death. And because, there's just no clunkers. It's all Beatles material. There's no cover songs, so there's no Twist and Shout and some of the other songs. They do great. But it's all stuff written by mostly Lennon and McCartney. On the 62-66, I think maybe there's only one George song. Later, of course, he gets more involved in the 67 to 70. But yeah, it's basically just the best of McCartney-Lennon, Lennon-McCartney. And just every song is phenomenal. I mean, how can you go wrong? So those 2 albums came out, huge for me. Informing my opinion of them, because they were just always sort of on and always sort of around, but I didn't really dive into albums until I became a teenager and got a record player. I bought a few albums, and then when I got my first CD player is when I went, okay, now I'm going to buy every album, the British version, get the real thing. Okay, let me just go down some of the other amazing albums that came out in 1973. Aerosmith's debut album came out with Dream On. Steely Dan's Countdown to Ecstasy came out. David Bowie's Aladdin Sane, which is the famous, kind of red lightning bolt. He had changed from the Ziggy Stardust persona of a year ago, and he put that to bed. He went to a concert, and he said, this is it. This is the final concert I'm going to do as Ziggy. And after that, he changed, and the Aladdin Sane album came out. Marvin Gaye puts out Let's Get It On, which, is now a pillow talk classic. Just an amazing R&B record after he had already, amazed people with What's Going On from a few years prior. One of my all-time favorite artists of all time is Bruce Springsteen. And he put out 2 albums in 1973. The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle in November. But before that, he put out his very first album, Greetings, from Asbury Park, New Jersey, in January. So you got a double dose of Bruce. Those albums are good. There's some standout tracks. They're not amongst my favorite Bruce albums of all time. The third album, Born to Run, is really where we're going to start talking. But of course, you've got Rosalita on there, you've got Sandy on there, you've got Blinded by the Light on there. So you've got some great tracks on there. I mentioned Stevie Wonder Intervisions. Queen's debut album comes out, which is not that noticeable other than it does have Killer Queen on it. Paul Simon has an album that comes out. There goes Ryman Simon. So I mean, look at the breadth. If I, like I said, if I was on a desert island and only could survive on 1973 music, I'd be doing well. Billy Joel puts out the album Piano Man with the song Piano Man. It's not his debut, but it's his first big, huge hit. Barry Manilow, who is really important to me, and I'll talk more about Barry as we go along. He puts out his debut album, which I don't think has any huge hits on it. What's the one song it has on it? I think it's called Barry Manilow, Barry Manilow. Because the next album is Manilow 2. I'm not gonna remember. It's the orchestra one where he's playing like the piano and it's like a classical riff, and then it goes into the song. My mind's kidding. And then a completely opposite end of the spectrum, ZZ Top puts out Tres Hombres, which means three men in Spanish, and it's one of their first big albums, and the song La Grange is on that record. And let me play a little ZZ Top for you. How often do you get to listen to ZZ Top? Here's a little bit of La Grange for you. And when we moved to Texas in '77, and I grew up, my late elementary and into junior high and into early high school years in Texas, ZZ Top was huge. And of course they hit their peak in 1982 with Eliminator, which has Sharp Dressed Man on it and stuff, and we'll get there. But I mean, if you just go down that list, you've got albums by Paul McCartney, Elton John, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Beatles, Steely Dan, David Bowie, Marvin Gaye, Bruce Springsteen, Queen, Stevie Wonder, Paul Simon, ZZ Top, John Denver, Aerosmith. I mean, just an incredible array of, I guess, like a classic rock programmer, radio programmer's wet dream of just amazing assortment of songs. Some of the best singles. Let's go over those real quick. Top 5 singles. Angie by the Rolling Stones was a huge song for them. Kind of a down-tempo ballad, but really plaintive singing from Mick, and it's a wonderful song. That's on an album called Goat's Head Soup. The big number one, really, of the year on a lot of the charts, this chart listed at number 2, but I've seen it at number 1 on other charts for the year, is Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree. I think that's the entire title, by a guy named Tony Orlando and Dawn. Now, the power of one song, we talked about You Light Up My Life, I think, before in another episode. The power of this one song was such a huge, massive hit. So it's one kind of cheesy guy in kind of a bad, tuxedo, and he's got an okay voice, and he's got 2 backup singers who are collectively known as Dawn. I think they had their own names and stuff. And so it was the 3 of them, and they would come out, and they would sing this song, and they had some other hits, I think. But they got their own TV show off the power of this popularity of this one song, and he had like a variety hour, and I remember my parents watching it, the Tony Orlando and Dawn Hour or something like that. Sweet. A band that's kind of made a resurgence because their song was featured in a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. They had one of their big hits was in 1973 called Ballroom Blitz. And again, you might be like, that sounds familiar. And that's because it's been in other movies, most notably in Wayne's World. If you're a fan of the movie Wayne's World, it's the movie Tia Carrere, the female lead in that movie. Her band sings in that one big scene where she kind of attracts Wayne, and it's a great kind of like pop punk song, but it was originally by this band called Sweet, and now their song called Fox on the Run has been used in Guardians, so they're kind of coming back again. I mentioned Elton John's Crocodile Rock, number 4, and number 5, another song by Roberta Flack. We talked about how she won a Grammy for what was the song that she won a Grammy for the previous year? Let me see if I can find it really quick. Oh, you guys are hating me now because this is just dead air. Roberta Flack. First time ever I saw your face. So this year she came out with Killing Me Softly with His Song. And it's a great song. It's been redone by the Fugees, and it won Grammy for the Record of the Year. So she was really riding high, Roberta Flack, in 72, 73. Okay, so that's it for music. We're going to cut now, and when we come back, we'll talk about movies. All right. All right, we're back. And just before we get into movies, I went over and grabbed some stuff. They put out some really nice reissues of the Zeppelin catalog recently on CD if you're into buying CDs. This is Houses of the Holy, and you get 2 discs, studio outtakes and demos, and then, of course, you get a remaster of the album. And like I said, only 8 songs, but song remains the same. Rain Song, Over the Hills and Far Away, The Grunge, Dancing Days, Deer Maker, No Quarter, and The Ocean. Just one of my all-time favorites. If you haven't heard a lot of Zeppelin outside of, say, the more heavy rock, this is the album for you. And, of course, there's a booklet in there and whatnot. Nothing on the back, though, just kind of the inverse photographic treatment of the cover. But absolutely wonderful album. Like I said, I'm a massive Bruce fan. I have a lot of boxes of Bruce stuff. This is all the early albums in a box, and I'm hoping they're going to do some of the later stuff. So this is called Volume 1, and this is really the stretch that you need to get. So all of the albums come in sort of their original looking sleeves, and even like Born to Run, which we'll get to in a future episode, Gatefold, so just like the real thing. So Reproduction, there's a booklet, of course, in here. And so these are the 2 albums that came out in 73. Greetings from Asbury Park. So Blinded by the Light, of course, which is the name of that new movie. And it actually had like a postcard. This is how the actual album was, like this, and then you would open it. And the disc would come out of here. And even the inside is a reproduction of what the inner sleeve would look like. So they would have been advertised. It wouldn't have been anything about Bruce because he wasn't anybody yet. So it would be advertising other bands on the label, and and telling who else is in the band, etc. So Growing Up is on here. So many of the songs that he did live when he put out that live box set that's so good. So this one, the reproduction is nothing. So sometimes we're just like, oh, we didn't do anything on. So this is Wild the Innocent and the E Street Shuffle. Picture of the band there on the back, very 70s looking. And of course, 4th of July, Sandy, and Rosalita. Those are probably the 2 standout hits from this album. So, and then lastly, Elton John. I can't express to you how much of a huge early Elton John fan I am, especially the 70s Elton John. And so this has all kinds of stuff in it. It's pretty thick, but this is dedicated to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and it's a 2014 remaster. Then songs from the album done by other people like Ed Sheeran, the band Perry, people I haven't heard of, Fall Out Boy, Zac Brown Band. Then, of course, demo stuff, and then a whole live disc from a Hammersmith Odeon concert in December 1973. So you open it up, and there's multiple discs of goodness. And then included also is this pretty thick book, just with reproductions of costumes and articles and lyrics and stuff and pictures, and so really nice package if you're into Elton like I am. But of course the main thing is the remastered album, and it's 17 songs. It was a double album, like I said. It all fits on one CD nowadays with the allotment they can get on there now. But Funeral for a Friend, Love's Light Bleeding, Candle in the Wind, Benny and the Jets, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. I've seen that movie too. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. All the Young Girls Love Alice. I mean, it's just such a phenomenal album. You owe it to yourself if you only get a few early rock and roll records to get Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Okay. Me showing off my stuff. All right, films. Let's talk about movies in 1973. Not the most amazing year, but some standout films for sure. So let's just go down the top of the list. Number 1 movie of the year as far as box office was The Sting. Uh, what can you say? Nominated for 10 Oscars. It won 7: Best Picture, Best Directing, Best Writing, or Best Screenplay that's based on something else. No, Best Screenplay Original? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was original screenplay. Uh, Paul Newman, Robert Redford, they teamed up in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, popular duo, came back, did this movie, total change of pace. It's about grifters in like the 1920s, and brought back ragtime music. Scott Joplin music became popular again. It is an absolute classic. If you've never seen it, you owe it to yourself. The twists in it, everything. Robert Shaw is great in it, who would go on to be in Jaws. It is a phenomenal movie. Probably, when people ask me, Jason, what's your favorite action movie? What's your favorite comedy? What's your favorite this or that? People say, what's your favorite scary movie? What's your favorite horror movie? Well, I have a few that I like in that genre, but probably the movie that has scared me the most, especially when I think I first watched it when I was probably in my mid-teens, is The Exorcist. It is so freaking scary. And there's just all different, it works on so many different levels, a very visceral level, what you're seeing, what the little girl is doing and saying, on a psychological level. If you have any religion in your life ever and what it makes you think about, there's a scene with needles where she's getting probed. There's just so many layers to that film. And it was the number one movie worldwide. Domestically, it was number 2 in America, but worldwide, it made a huge amount of money for 1973. And it also won some Oscars, including a screenplay for Best Adapted Screenplay, because Peter Blatty wrote it based on his novel. William Friedkin made that. He made French Connection, he made a few other great movies, but this is probably his masterpiece. Number 3 movie, a lot of people forget that George Lucas had a really popular movie before Star Wars, and that's American Graffiti. It came out in 1973. Harrison Ford's in it. Ron Howard, who would later go on to be in Happy Days, which kind of came about because of the resurgence in that sort of feel-good feeling about that time period. This is 73, but they're looking back a good 10 to 12 years to say 1963. Before Vietnam, before Watergate, before a lot of the problems that were besetting 1973, and more of a carefree time. And of course, George Lucas's love of hot rods and cars and wall-to-wall music, and the way they would record sound and everybody would be talking over everybody. There's a lot of technological innovations in that film, and it made bombs of money because it only cost like $8 million to make, or some really small amount, maybe even less than that. Maybe I'm exaggerating that number, but it really set him up to where he could ask for some of the things he asked for on Star Wars and get them because of the success of American Graffiti. Papillon, which is a French word which means butterfly, is the number 4 movie. It's a Dustin Hoffman, Steve McQueen movie. Really like heavy drama about these two guys that are in a French prison camp, but in like South America, in like French Guyana, and what they do for each other in the camp and how they survive. It's set, I don't know, in like 1920 or 1930, so it's set in the past, and very, very good, but not something you'd watch a lot, but you should watch it once. The performing and acting in it is amazing. Movie I've never seen is at number 5, and that's The Way We Were. I don't do a lot of rom-coms. My mother loves Barbra Streisand, so I don't know how I got around not seeing this, because I like some of her other movies. Funny Girl is good, and some of the other ones. But this is just an all-out, romance movie with her and Robert Redford, and of course has that famous song, The Way We Were. And so that was number 5. Number 6 was Magnum Force. A title like that is just so vague. It has no recollection to anything. But back in the day, sequels weren't such a huge thing. So they didn't come out with Dirty Harry, which is the first movie in the series, and then say, this is Dirty Harry 2. They named it something else. And so all 5 Dirty Harry movies are called something else. There's Sudden Impact, there's Magnum Force, there's The Gauntlet. Is that one of them? Maybe that's a whole different movie. Anyway, and of course Dirty Harry was the first one, but they all have Dirty Harry Callahan, that character, in it. This is the second one, and it made a lot of money again. All right, number 7 was an adult movie. Woohoo. Famous for its sex scene, but with Marlon Brando. It's called The Last Tango in Paris. It was made by Bernardo Bertolucci. who went on to do one of my favorite movies called The Last Emperor. Don't know a lot about that movie. Probably not something I would ever have watched growing up. I like Brando, but I'm not like exhaustive about him. I don't think I need to see everything he's ever done. So yeah, leave a comment if you've seen it and you go like, Jason, yeah, you should see that. Tell me. I'll give it a shot. Number 8, one of my all-time favorite Bond movies. I love James Bond. Live and Let Die. So Live and Let Die was the 8th James Bond movie, but the first James Bond movie to feature Roger Moore as 007. They'd had 5. Then Sean Connery said he was going to retire. They brought in George Lazenby. They brought back Connery for one more. And now Connery really decided to go away. So they brought in Roger Moore. I love Roger Moore as James Bond. I mean, I love Sean Connery too, don't get me wrong. And the Bond films, we talk about how The Exorcist was number 1 worldwide. Live and Let Die was number 2 worldwide. The Bond films are huge in other markets. Action movies translate so well. And Live and Let Die has some great stuff. The speedboat chase, all the stuff with the voodoo guy and the cards. The girl in it is gorgeous. Of course, it's got the Paul McCartney song for the theme song, one of the best Bond theme songs of all time. And number 9 was Robin Hood, the Disney version of Robin Hood with the foxes and oodle-lolly, golly, what a day. So I love Robin Hood. I think, like I said in another video, they would re-release them. So I think I saw Robin Hood probably in 78 because they would release them again about 5 years later. Because in 73 I would have been probably too young, unless my parents took me to see it, but I don't know if that's when I very first saw it or not. The number 3 movie worldwide, but not on the top 9 domestically, was Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee movie, his last movie. So Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, and he'd finished filming Enter the Dragon, which I think was his 5th film, and he was only 32 years old. So sad. Him and his son, Brandon. And then the film came out in August of 1973, so about a month after his death. It's kind of like when Heath Ledger died and then the Joker, Dark Knight came out. And I think a lot of people went to see it, for that. There was kind of a kung fu craze going on in America in the early 70s. This movie called Five Fingers of Death had come out and got very popular in certain communities, and especially in urban communities. And so this movie came out, and it's an amazing, great movie. Don't get me wrong. Enter the Dragon is fantastic. It's big budget. He had a studio backing him for the first time, an American studio, and it is easily his best film. And he's fantastic in it. It's just a shame we never got another one, right? They cobbled together a 6 movie out of like footage that he had filmed and other things, but it wasn't very good. Other movies that aren't on the top 10, Al Pacino won a Golden Globe for Serpico. Serpico is a great kind of crime thriller about an insider guy kind of trying to root out police corruption. Mean Streets, the debut of Martin Scorsese. He had done 2 other movies, Boxcar Bertha and something else is escaping my mind. But they weren't really Martin Scorsese movies. They were movies where he had been hired by like Roger Corman or other people to make a movie, and he did. But Mean Streets is really the first Martin Scorsese movie. And then, of course, you get Taxi Driver, and you get Raging Bull, and you get, and so on and so forth. So, you've got Harvey Keitel in it. You've got early Robert De Niro. Mean Streets is an amazing movie. You should definitely see that. My favorite Western of all time. Well, I don't know. I love really a lot of Westerns. Rio Bravo is great. Unforgiven is great. Maybe my top 3. My top 3 Westerns of all time is a movie called My Name is Nobody. And it's not a film that many people have seen or even heard of. It's got a fairly unknown actor these days named Terrence Hill in it. But the other big actor in it is Henry Fonda, who's very well known and was very big in Westerns at the time. And the reason it's kind of notable is because it's got Ennio Morricone music in it, the creator of all the spaghetti Western music for Sergio Leone. And even though it's credited to another guy named Tonio Violori or something, basically people think that Sergio Leone directed about half of the movie. He came up with the idea and then turned it over to this other guy, but most people think he kind of stepped in, kind of like Spielberg on Poltergeist, you know? So it's just got great scenes. It's got a lot of humor. The music is amazing. It's got some good suspense, action. I don't know why. I must have just seen it on cable sometime, and then I would try to catch it, and then eventually, of course, I got it on DVD. But it's up there. I really love that movie. And then a sci-fi movie that most of you probably at least know the term. It's like now we would say maybe the meme of it, and that's Soylent Green. So if you don't know, I'm not going to spoil it here, and don't spoil it in the comments if you know. But Soylent Green is this famous science fiction film. It came out in 1973, of course, but it's set in 2022, which now is kind of interesting. All these movies that are set sort of in the future, and then that future it comes, where the world is in trouble, and we're eating these like little capsules to keep us alive because we don't have real food anymore, and the capsules, nobody's really sure what's in them. And so this movie, it's got Charlton Heston in it. It's a good little movie. It's not amazing, but it did create this kind of meme, and I won't give it away now because if you haven't seen it, you should go see it and discover it for yourself. But it's a lot of fun. So there are some of the best movies. I'm sure I put the posters up over my shoulder as we went along. Do you have a favorite movie from 1973 I missed? Please let me know, because I do miss stuff from time to time. And I'll come on back with world events coming up next. All right, as you can see, it's a nice sunny day today. It's been typhoon weather, etc. This is the end of my summer vacation. I go back to work on Monday, and then the kids come back on the 26th. Japanese school year is year-round almost, so it's not summer vacation between the end of a school year and the beginning of a new one. It's just a continuation of the school year that started in April. But yeah, I didn't do a whole lot. Kind of saving some money. I want to get rid of that couch, which is very cold-blooded. You know what I'm talking about? That couch is very warm when you sit on it in the summer and very cold when you sit on it in the winter. And get maybe a recliner chair. Anyway, we'll see if that happens. So I've been saving my money a little bit, and but I wanted to film at least one of these during summer vacation. So here we go, and we've gotten through movies, we've gotten through films. Now we got world events. So I think I talked a lot in 1969 episode about the Apollo 11 moon landing and how significant that was to me. And here we are 4 years later, and on January 14th, Elvis, who had made a comeback in 1968 and was slowly regaining popularity, held a concert in Hawaii that was satellite broadcast around the world. And more people watched that on satellite television than watched the Apollo 11 moon landing. So there you go. Still a huge draw, Elvis. And that was definitely in the jumpsuit, the total like white jumpsuit glory years. He dies in 1977. So, but this was him, just in full, and he was only 42 or something, so he would still have been in his 30s here in 73, and, fantastic. I've seen that concert. You can get it on, video. I'm sure parts of it are on YouTube as well. In sports, I don't do a lot of sports, but this is a pretty big one. In January of 73, in the Super Bowl 7, the Miami Dolphins won, and they completed the only perfect season ever in the NFL. So which means they won every single game of the year. I believe there were 16 back then, maybe 15 or 16 regular season games. They won their 2 playoff games, and then they won the Super Bowl. The only other team that's gotten close is maybe about 10 years ago or so. I don't even know if it was that long ago. The New England Patriots with Tom Brady won every game, and then they got to the Super Bowl and they lost. So they would have had another perfect season. So the Miami Dolphins, the only team to ever do that. So that was under Don Shula back in the day. On January 20th, Nixon sworn in for his second term. So they had the election, and he won to be president again. amid kind of the growing Watergate scandal. It hasn't fully come out yet, so people, still were putting their trust in him. But he would resign a year and a half later in August of 1974. So it all starts to come to a boil in 73, going into 74. January 22nd, a hugely important Supreme Court case that still reverberates through American politics today. I don't really want the comments to be, this side or that side of this issue, but it is an important thing that if you ever, I know a lot of you watch this and you live in Europe or other places, if you ever go to America, it's a very touchy subject in America, and that's abortion. And this is the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court case where the National Federal Supreme Court of America overturned states' bans on abortion. So federally they mandated that abortion should be legal, that the states don't have the right to say yes or no on that. That's a federal thing. And that stayed since then. They haven't been able, as much as the conservatives and the pro-life movement, as they call themselves, want to overturn it or take it back. They haven't been able to. Vietnam starts to wind down in 1973, which is good. January 27th, the Paris Peace Accords happen. The U.S. officially pulls out of Vietnam, but of course, our soldiers are still there for a few months. I think the last soldiers that aren't POWs leave in late March of 1973. So Vietnam now, that bloody chapter, which was so unpopular for so many people, it finally starts to come to an end. Of course, the repercussions of Vietnam and PTSD for some of the soldiers and would be felt for years and years and years to come. Just a recent movie that made me think of this event. Bobby Riggs was kind of a fading pro tennis player, and he challenged a woman to play him. Kind of, like men are better than women. Women can't play pro sports. I can beat any woman. And he played a woman named Margaret Court, who was a Wimbledon champion and a very good player, and he beat her. But an up-and-coming player at that time, Billie Jean King, said, look, I could beat you. You're an old man. She was, I think, in her 20s. He was in his, late 40s or something. And she did. They played at the Houston Astrodome and in front of a huge crowd, one of the biggest crowds ever to watch a live tennis match. On September of 1973, it was called the Battle of the Sexes. And she beat him in 3 straight sets, 6-4, 6-4, 6-3 or something. And they made a movie of it recently with Steve Carell as Bobby Riggs. And I'm going to forget her name. The girl from La La Land. Emma Stone, I believe, playing Billie Jean King. A really good movie, kind of behind the scenes of how it all happened and everything. But that was happening because there was a lot of the main thing going on then was women's rights, the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and the fact that women got paid so much less prize money than the men did for professional sports. And this is still something that's going on. We just saw it this past summer in the Women's World Cup, where the American women are saying, look, we're so much better than the American men's team. We win these things, but we get paid so much less to play. And it's an ongoing debate. Even now, 45 years later, it's still something that people are talking about. So the Watergate scandal is kind of happening in the background, not in the background, very much on the front page as well, but just kind of going along all of the year. In April, what was the big Watergate moment in April? I can't remember. Sorry. In October, Vice President Agnew, Spiro Agnew, resigns. Now, he was implicated in Watergate a little bit, but really the main reason he resigned was tax evasion. They caught him on tax evasion. So a lot of people were doing some fishy things in the Nixon White House, and so he resigned. So then the Senate and the House of Representatives have to approve the person they're going to pick to become the new vice president, and that person was Gerald Ford, who had been the majority leader of the House. So he was just a he was a representative, but he got elevated all the way to vice president, and then of course Nixon would resign, and he became president. So he's the only person ever to become vice president and president without ever being elected to either office. So that all happened in November and December they voted for him, and it passed fine. I think he was well liked and, fairly bland guy coming in the wake of Nixon. And he didn't run for re-election in '76. He stepped down, and Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, stepped in and won. And that's it, really. Not a whole lot of world events. I mean, there were, but not too huge. A lot of airline stuff going on. Again, I think I talked about that in another episode. Hijackings and stuff. Just stuff we don't really hear about that much anymore. We don't hear that much about plane crashes, thank goodness. They seem to be much safer nowadays. And we don't really hear about hijackings because of what was going on in the early 70s. Now we have all these safety measures in place to make it much harder to do that. But back then it was not a common occurrence, but it happened more than you would think. The two notable deaths that I saw on the list as I went down the Wikipedia page in 1973 were people. It's funny because I think of 1973 as sort of modern America, modern times, even though I was a very young person and it's now 45 years ago. But I think of these two individuals as having lived way in the past, like before my time, like, you know what I'm saying? And so one of them was J.R.R. Tolkien, the man who wrote the Lord of the Rings books. He died in 1973. He was 81 years old. So he was born in the 1800s. And what an amazing lifespan that would have been to see all the new inventions and everything that were coming out from 1900 onward. And like him, even older, died in 1973 was Pablo Picasso, the famous Cubist painter. He was 91. So he had been born in the 1880s. And just a phenomenal things he must have seen in his lifetime. Good and bad, But what an impact both of those men had on culture, popular culture and artistic culture. And they both went away in 1973. All right, that is it for me this time. Not as long maybe as some of the other ones, but that's okay. Probably one more, 74. Again, not a whole lot in my life. Go through it. But 75's things start to happen. We get Jaws. We get My Baby Brother Is Born. 76, the Centennial, America's Birthday. 77 is Star Wars. And bigger than that in my life was us moving to Texas. So I'll start talking about that. So in the upcoming episodes, we're going to have some more stuff like that happening. If you watch this one all the way through, I thank you. I even went out and bought a notebook to start. This one's kind of full, my research notebook. So I'm going to start a new one. I do still want to keep doing these. So if you watch this one, thank you so much. I know they only get 300-400 views, but those 300-400 views are people like you that are awesome. And leave a comment, leave a like. If you have a question, do that too. And if there's something from that year that you know about that I missed, please tell me about it, and I'll mention it hopefully in the next video. Okay, guys, take care of yourselves. We'll see you. Let's hope for September. I think September. Okay, peace.